Salutations everybody, it is Maddie here today. I hope each and every single one of you are having a fantastic day and enjoyed a nice, relaxing weekend. Now, over said weekend, we received information about CD Projekt Red and the highly anticipated Cyberpunk 2077, specifically some information about the multiplayer component for that game. Now, the following information will be sourced from two areas. The first is an article from PlayStation Lifestyle, and the other is the actual documentation for the Q3 2019 earnings call that CD Projekt Red was a part of. Both will be linked in the description down below. I recommend reading the earnings call just because I appreciate this level of data. It's not like it's brand new to our industry. We've seen plenty and plenty for many years, but still, it's neat to read. Now, let us begin. In a recent earnings call explaining its Q3 2019 financial performance, CD Projekt Red told investors that Cyberpunk 2077's multiplayer component is a smaller project than its single-player campaign that the studio is only just starting to work on. And while it's too early to share any details, monetization will offer players value for money. Now, this is where the conversation begins. A lot of people have faith in CD Projekt Red because they have done a lot of consumer-friendly things in the past. We'll get into a little bit later in the video as to how they can actually maintain this type of business model. But some are taken aback at the fact that CD Projekt Red is doing what would be considered a standard industry practice, which is dabbling in microtransactions in your multiplayer mode. How could they ever do this to us? And then there's people like me who sit in the middle, and I'll get into exactly why. Let's get into exactly what Adam Kaczynski, CEO of CD Projekt Red, had to say. As far as the monetization of multiplayer for Cyberpunk is concerned, we believe right now it's definitely too early to share any details on that or give guidance. The project is in a relatively early stage. We keep experimenting, that's our first multiplayer game. We check various options and possibilities, and it's definitely not the time to point you to a specific direction on that. Of course, we can expect that we won't change our general policy towards deals with gamers, so I expect wise monetization and always value for money. So I think what essentially is happening is a lot of people are reading really deep into this because it sounds like just a general framework that internally they have a multiplayer idea for this game. Maybe it'll be like first person team deathmatch or something along those lines, or it could be something like you could all meet up in this hub at a night bar and you could play mini games together against each other. That could be another cool route. And the only reason I suggest that is because of how successful Gwent was for The Witcher 3, so maybe they try to replicate that in their own way. Point being is this very much just sounds like a framework. We're going to monetize our multiplayer mode, but I do like their use of wise monetization. Of course, I've pointed out in the past that I feel CD Projekt Red always tries to color their statements a little bit, if you will, to shine a more positive light on them. They could just say, so expect monetization and always value for money, but they said wise monetization. And I've noticed a lot of articles and videos really clinging to that exact phrase. And that's the exact type of response that CD Projekt Red fuels off of to continue to experiment going forward. Anyway, let's keep informing ourselves and then we'll have a more extended discussion after this. Royalties associated with the Witcher franchise increase in Q3 2019 compared to the same period last year, making an important contribution towards the overall 38% year-on-year increase in sales revenue. Royalties associated with Thronebreaker, a game you should play by the way if you actually like what CD Projekt does, and in-game sales of Gwent also saw a slight increase year-on-year. At present, CD Projekt Red is focusing on introducing the Cyberpunk universe to as many gamers as possible around the globe, so they're looking to make it a very big brand just like The Witcher. Now, some of the information that I just read is shown here in the actual document from the teleconference. What I want to point out though is how CD Projekt Red is able to maintain such a consumer-friendly model unlike so many other AAA companies. And it's good to see the success in the one area I'm about to point out, because this means hopefully going forth into this Cyberpunk multiplayer component, we can expect things to be relatively fair in monetization. So in the second section, at A, it says at GOG, revenues from digital distribution over 30 million, not gonna lie, I had to look this up, Poland zloty, sorry if I mispronounced that, which grew by 12% quarter to quarter. Now, I did the math, and that would translate to about $7.5 million for the US. So quite a bit of money is coming in from GOG, a digital distribution store that CD Projekt owns. This is sort of what fueled going forward into The Witcher 3, their ability to give out 16 free pieces of content before they really got into doing actual DLC that people would pay for. And I imagine, given that it seems like Cyberpunk will have a similar model, although a multiplayer mode will be tacked on at the end, that we can expect a similar approach. What I don't quite understand is a lot of people reacting in such a surprisingly negative way about this information. Don't get me wrong, I'm not thrilled to see monetization, but there's two aspects I like to point out. Number one is, as much as sometimes the fanboyism surrounding CD Projekt Red can get a little tedious because people sometimes just don't shut up about it. And I'm not saying you can't love what you love, but at the end of the day, CD Projekt Red has earned the trust of their consumers, or at least they should have in the most part. If you don't like their products, totally fine, but they have proven that they have the consumer in mind when they make a business decision. And if they can't be allowed a little bit of slack for the positive gamer-focused choices they've made, I really don't know who actually can outside of some indie developers. Number two, and this is more business speak, is that how are they going to sustain a multiplayer mode in an industry where multiplayer requires updates every month at the very minimum if they don't have any currency coming in for this game, especially given the fact that, and we'll get into this in a second, we're going to see single player expansions before anything multiplayer related. They're going to be sinking a lot of resources into Cyberpunk, which I'm sure they'll make back in sales, of course, in some respect. But just like GOG, it would be great to see CD Projekt Red find some form of sustainable income. And I think the reason that they're going to try a multiplayer mode for Cyberpunk is because Gwent and its standalone game really didn't work out. Now, we do see in the earnings call that it did grow year on year, which is good to see, but it was a slight increase, and even CD Projekt Red notes in the report that it's only a small part of their business. So even they are well aware that this game is not necessarily hurting them, but it's not performing as large as I think they really expected, because Gwent was quite the phenomenon when The Witcher 3 first came out. It was like, wow, this is such a deep RPG, there's so much great about this game, and then you have on top of that a very fun card game, which then CD Projekt Red turned into its own standalone game, and after that led to Thronebreaker, which was going to be just a single player expansion of the Gwent game, but it turned into its own game entirely. And like I said a few minutes ago, fantastic game, definitely give it a shot. Anyway, word for word, here's what CD Projekt Red had to say about the future of their plans for Cyberpunk when it came to multiplayer and single player, and we'll wrap up the discussion. This is a couple months old. I did cover it originally, but it's worth bringing back up for this discussion. Until now, the only thing that we said about multiplayer was that it was in research and development. As we're getting closer to launching single player Cyberpunk 2077 in April of 2020, we'd like to confirm that multiplayer is in the works. If you feel like lending us your skills, then feel free to apply. What's more interesting is after that, their second tweet, which is the plan is for now to deliver Cyberpunk 2077 in April, then follow up with DLCs, which will be free, just like The Witcher 3, and single player content. And once we're done, invite you for some multiplayer action. So what we're seeing here is not what we saw, for example, with GTA Online or Red Dead Online, where essentially you have this very meaty single player part of the game that is so fun, it's so enjoyable to hop back into those worlds, but people end up eventually, after all those hours, wanting more. And especially when Red Dead Redemption has one of the most popular single player expansions of all time, you'd think that at least that game would have earned some single player DLC, but that never did happen. Both GTA and Red Dead were abandoned for their online component because they continued to receive lots of revenue through that, so their focuses shifted there. Doesn't mean that Rockstar didn't create a great single player component, but they are largely abandoned immediately after launch. Where what I like is that CD Projekt Red is going to bring us single player content, fill out that world even more, and then once they're done, once they're like, okay, that's it, move on to multiplayer. And I can appreciate that. That's where my leeway steps in, because I know even if I don't like Cyberpunk, which I highly doubt that will end up happening, but let's say it is a dud or it's not as good as it looked in the demos, you know, it gets a little Ubisoft E3 effect. At the end of the day, they're still going to complete the single player experience and then bring us multiplayer. Something that usually does not happen in our industry. It's normally either running them parallel at the same time, which I think, given the fact that development for this really only started 2 months ago. In the scheme of things, it's not going to interfere deeply with the final stretch of Cyberpunk 2077, and game development is sort of a pendulum that swings back and forth. Okay, we're going to move some of the multiplayer team over to the single player now to get in that final stretch, finish the game, polish it as much as possible. Now it's out. Okay, we got a couple more people who can swing over to the multiplayer part. So there's this constant back and forth in game development, at least from developers I've interviewed and talked to in the past. So I wouldn't expect this to interfere too much because it seems like their priority is going to be on the single player. But at the end of the day, if you are a little skeptical, I don't blame you. I can't blame you one bit because it is a change of pace for this company. And I'm not going to sit here and act like they don't like money. They may look at it and say, okay, well, we do have, of course, GOG. We have a lot of great products from CD Projekt Red bringing us revenue. But hey, what if we monetize one of their games? Now, I don't think it's going to be monetized to hell, but I'm going to be really curious when we start to learn more about the monetization of Cyberpunk 2077's multiplayer mode, how people will react, how understanding they'll be. Will people just roll over if it's unfair? That's what I always find very interesting, to see who is willing to make excuses for the company, because at the end of the day, they don't care. They just want your money. And even companies like CD Projekt Red that act like your friend, they're cool, don't get me wrong. Cool people who work at that company, really like that company, but they're still a business. So that's just my thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. Are you concerned at all about Cyberpunk 2077? Fire away. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.